He was alone on a train, lost in his own thoughts, when the woman next to him leaned in and whispered, "Pretend you're my husband. Now." With no time for questions, he played along, not imagining that this impromptu gesture would launch them into an unexpected conversation, one of those that changes the way we see ourselves and others. Sometimes, the greatest encounters happen just when we're not looking. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is the Linda's Stories channel. I hope you enjoy this story. The hum of the computers still echoed in Ethan Carter's head as he walked through the station. 6 years as a financial analyst in a corporation that always demanded more, but always offered the same. That day had been particularly exhausting. 3 consecutive meetings, an urgent report, and the news that he would need to work over the weekend to finish the presentation for the new project. The weight of the briefcase seemed heavier than usual, as did the weight on his shoulders. At 30, Ethan increasingly questioned whether this was really the path he had dreamed for himself. The fluorescent office lights had left marks on his vision, small dots that danced when he closed his eyes. A constant reminder that he spent more time looking at spreadsheets than at the sky. The train arrived promptly at 7:42 p.m. Ethan boarded and found an empty seat by the window, a small victory on a day of defeats. He settled in, letting out a sigh that seemed to carry all the accumulated fatigue of the week. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the metallic noise of the tracks below to momentarily replace the mental noise of his worries. Ethan felt movement beside him. Someone had taken the empty seat. Without opening his eyes, he shrank a little, giving way, already irritated for losing the small luxury of a bench just for himself. The gentle scent of jasmine announced it was a woman. He planned to keep his eyes closed, pretending to sleep to avoid any possibility of conversation, when he felt a firm hand on his arm. "Pretend you're my husband. Now," a female voice whispered close to his ear. Ethan opened his eyes, startled. Beside him sat a woman of about 35, with brown hair tied in an unassuming bun, amber eyes conveying a silent plea. She wore a discreet business suit and held his arm with a studied naturalness, as if they had been close for a long time. Before he could process that absurd request, Ethan noticed 2 women approaching down the train aisle. Both were wearing expensive clothes and perfect smiles, the kind that seem like they belong on magazine covers. They stopped right in front of them, their inquisitive gazes fixed on the woman beside him. "Evelyn Mitchell! I can't believe it's you!" exclaimed the taller of the 2, adjusting her designer handbag on her arm. "So this is your famous husband. We finally get to meet the man you talk about so much." The woman, apparently Evelyn, lightly squeezed Ethan's arm, a silent signal asking for his complicity. She smiled, and he noticed how that smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, we're just passing through. We're heading back to our town, but we'll leave soon," Evelyn replied, her voice calm but with an underlying tension that only Ethan, so close to her, could perceive. The 2 women exchanged looks with expressions that mixed curiosity and something that seemed almost like satisfaction. Ethan felt Evelyn's discomfort grow, even while she maintained the perfectly placed smile. For some reason he didn't fully understand, he decided to join in the act. "I visited the city for the first time," he said, surprised at the naturalness in his own voice. "Evelyn always spoke very highly of it, especially about the friendships she cultivated." His comments seemed to have worked. The 2 women smiled, now apparently convinced. After a few minutes of small talk, during which Ethan managed to avoid revealing any specific details about his supposed marriage, the women finally said their goodbyes and got off at the next station. As soon as they disappeared, Evelyn's arm moved away from his as if the contact now burned. An awkward silence hung between them, broken only by the rhythmic noise of the train on the tracks. Ethan turned to face her, ready to demand an explanation. It was ridiculous, he thought. An adult woman inventing a husband to impress old acquaintances. He was mentally preparing the harsh words he would use when he noticed something that completely disarmed him. Evelyn's eyes were glistening, a single tear silently running down her right cheek. They weren't theatrical or manipulative tears. It was the restrained kind of crying from someone who is used to crying alone, from someone who has learned to swallow their own suffering so as not to bother others. Ethan recognized that expression. He had seen it many times in the mirror. "I'm sorry," she finally spoke, her voice just a whisper. "It was completely inappropriate. I just didn't know how to react when I saw them." She began gathering her things, clearly preparing to leave at the next stop. Ethan's initial irritation had dissipated, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Wait," he said, surprising himself by lightly touching her arm. "What's going on?" Evelyn hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag as if it were a lifeline. Finally, she let out a sigh and replied, "It's a long story." "I have time," Ethan responded, realizing that for the first time in a long while, he really wanted to hear someone else's story, or that he had completely stepped out of his usual routine. They got off together at Central Station. The sun had already set, and the city's lights were beginning to turn on, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. They walked side by side, initially in silence, then with steps that naturally synchronized. "Evelyn Mitchell." She finally introduced herself formally, extending her hand. "Ethan Carter," he replied, accepting the handshake. They entered a small cafe on the corner. The cozy atmosphere, with dim lights and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, created a comfort that seemed to isolate them from the outside world. They sat at a table in the back, where privacy allowed for confidences. "Those women were from my old school," Evelyn began, her fingers nervously playing with the napkin. "The kind of people who always had everything. Money, beauty, popularity. They were never cruel to me, but there was always that condescension, you know, as if my life was something to be pitied." Ethan nodded, encouraging her to continue. She stopped speaking for a moment, as if realizing what she was doing. A small laugh escaped her lips, almost shy, almost incredulous. "It seems crazy," she said, shaking her head slowly. "I'm here opening up to a complete stranger." He agreed with a brief smile, not hiding the surprise he also felt. "Yeah, I've never done anything like this before," he confessed, with the sincerity of someone surprised by themselves. "But for some reason I'm curious about you." The silence that followed was not awkward. On the contrary, it was as if there was space to breathe, as if there, in that unlikely encounter, there was something still unnamed, but real. "So," she continued, "my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was very young. I was an only child. My father had already passed away. I had no choice." Her voice faltered slightly. "Or rather, I made my choice. I set my life aside to take care of her." The years went by, and the disease progressed. The coffee arrived, but it cooled untouched while Evelyn continued her story. She now spoke with a firmer cadence, as if the narrative were a burden that she could finally share. "While my friends were building careers, getting married, travelling the world, I lived between my studies and taking care of my mother. I don't regret it, but—" She paused, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "I felt invisible. In the rare social gatherings, I had no interesting stories to tell, no extraordinary achievements, no exciting romances." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. How many times had he felt the same way, trapped in a life that seemed to be on autopilot, watching others' achievements from afar, convincing himself that he was just building his future while the present slipped through his fingers. One day, in one of those meetings, someone asked about my love life. I was tired of the expressions of pity, the "you'll find someone special," and the looks of commiseration. So, I made up a boyfriend, then a fiancé, eventually a husband. She smiled sadly. "And your mother?" Ethan asked gently. "She passed away 3 years ago," Evelyn replied, her gaze dropping momentarily. "After 15 years of daily care, I found myself completely alone, not knowing what to do with my newfound freedom. The invented husband ended up being a crutch I held on to. It was easier than explaining that At 35, I had never had a serious relationship because I was too busy changing my mother's diapers or monitoring her medication. The silence that followed was not heavy, but full of understanding. Ethan finally took a sip of his cold coffee before speaking. "You know, I understand more than you think," he said, looking out the window at the people rushing by on the sidewalk. "I've spent the last 10 years telling myself I was building a solid career, that the sacrifices would be worth it. I've let relationships die, friendships cool, hobbies be forgotten, all for a future that never arrives." Evelyn looked at him with genuine curiosity, something Ethan hadn't experienced in a long time. Not the assessing gaze of a superior at work, or the uninterested look of a casual encounter, but that of someone who truly wanted to understand. "What would you do if you could start over?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. What would he do? He had never really allowed himself to consider concrete alternatives. "Maybe start my own business, something small but mine," he replied, surprised by his own sincerity. "I've always liked the idea of a bookstore cafe, a welcoming place where people could feel at home." Evelyn smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes, lighting them up in a way Ethan found strangely captivating. "It's a beautiful dream," she said. "Why don't you try?" "Fear, I suppose. Safety. The same reason many of us get stuck in lives that don't satisfy us." The conversation flowed naturally after that, jumping from topic to topic with an ease that surprised them both. They laughed at silly jokes and shared small, daily frustrations. When they realized, it was already past midnight. Two strangers, just sitting there. "I need to go," said Evelyn, seeming genuinely reluctant. "I have an early shift tomorrow." Ethan nodded, feeling a pang of disappointment he didn't anticipate. "Which train line do you usually take?" he asked while they were paying the bill. "West Line, at 7:30 p.m. usually," she replied. "Me too," said Ethan, although he knew he rarely took the train at that specific time, preferring to stay later at the office to avoid the rush hour. They walked together to the station, the silence between them now comfortable, like that of old friends. When the time came to say goodbye, there was a moment of hesitation. "Thank you for not thinking I'm completely crazy," said Evelyn with a small smile. "Well, I didn't say that I didn't," joked Ethan, making her laugh, "but I think we all have our little eccentricities to survive." The next day, to his own surprise, Ethan left work promptly at 7 p.m., something he hadn't done in years. He caught the 7:30 train and, without much hope, looked for a familiar face among the passengers. His heart raced when he saw her, sitting alone, looking out the window. When their eyes met, Evelyn smiled, and Ethan noticed she had saved a spot next to her. In the days that followed, that casual encounter turned into a voluntary routine. The 7:30 p.m. train became a meeting point, not verbally agreed upon, but understood by both. Sometimes they talked throughout the entire journey. Other times they simply shared a comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet curiously strengthened by the presence of the other. 3 weeks after the first encounter, Ethan arrived at work with a resignation letter. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but something that had been maturing for years and had finally found the courage to execute. That same week, Evelyn requested a transfer to the palliative care ward of the hospital, something she had always wanted but had never allowed herself due to the irregular hours that would complicate caring for her mother. Small changes began to happen in both of their lives. Ethan enrolled in an entrepreneurship course and began researching locations for his future business. Evelyn finally unpacked the boxes with her mother's belongings, which she had stored in the guest room, transforming the space into a small studio to resume painting, a hobby she had abandoned almost 2 decades ago. On a Sunday afternoon, 2 months after the unusual request on the train, they were walking through a city park. Autumn painted the trees red and yellow, creating an almost magical landscape around them. "Do you know what's funny?" said Evelyn, while they watched children playing near a lake. "I spent so much time pretending to have someone so I wouldn't feel incomplete in the eyes of others, that I didn't even realize how it prevented me from truly finding genuine connections." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly. And I spent so much time chasing an idea of success that I never questioned if it was what I really wanted, he replied. It's strange how sometimes we need a complete stranger to make us see what was right in front of us. Evelyn smiled, holding his arm with the same naturalness of that first meeting, but now without pretenses, without the need for an audience. Just a simple gesture, full of meaning. They didn't exactly know how to classify what they had. They were not just friends, but they also hadn't crossed the line into something romantic. There was a mutual respect for the time each needed to rebuild their own lives before possibly building something together. As the sun set on the horizon, Ethan realized that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't anxious about the next day or dwelling on the past. He was simply present, appreciating the moment. Beside him, Evelyn seemed to share the same feeling of peace. Perhaps the future held a love story for them. Perhaps they would remain friends, confidants who met at the exact moment they needed each other the most. It didn't really matter. What they had there, this unexpected connection, born from a desperate request on a crowded train, was already more valuable than anything they might have imagined. At that instant, the certainty was won. Loneliness, when shared, ceased to be an abyss and became a path. Life rarely followed the planned script, but sometimes its improvisations were infinitely more beautiful than any story we could write for ourselves. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.